Well, hi, everyone. I'm Keira Sorrells, and this is NICUnity. NICUnity is NICU Parent Network's all-encompassing educational initiative to foster a culture of belonging for all members of our community. This initiative is made possible by the generous support of Chiesi USA. Chiesi is a privately owned, research-focused pharmaceutical company with both a B Corp and a benefit corporation status. Chiesi strives to make an impact through forward-looking and impactful initiatives that benefit patients, patient families, providers, and healthcare organizations. Chiesi recognizes and appreciates the vital role that patient families play in the care of babies in the NICU and is very proud to support our community. You can visit www.NICUconnections.com to learn a little bit more about their advocacy work. So our monthly schedule of NICUnity offerings include discussions, leadership lounges, and special health topic webinars that bring together NICU parent leaders, adult former NICU patients, healthcare partners, and maternal infant health stakeholders for candid discussions about diverse experiences in the NICU and beyond. What we really want to do with these offerings is to shine a light on those who are often marginalized, silenced, and underestimated. And we are thrilled to provide this platform for these raw and authentic conversations. So I want to thank you all for joining us as we embark on this journey of learning, growth, and unity. Together, we will build a stronger, more inclusive NICU community, one conversation at a time. So for today's NICUnity health discussion, we are recognizing PTSD Awareness Month, and I'm so happy to be joined by Anese Barnett, who is a doctoral student in clinical psychology. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a common mental health condition experienced by over 50% of NICU mothers or birthing partners and over 30% of NICU fathers and non-birthing partners. So this discussion, we're going to do kind of a high-level overview of PTSD, how it presents in different populations, and we'll also learn about how to support families who may be experiencing PTSD. We always want to make sure that we give some tangible takeaways with each of these discussions. So what we're really doing today is we want to raise awareness about PTSD and provide those valuable resources for you. So Anese, I'm so glad that you're here. For those who have not had the pleasure of meeting Anese, she is a perinatal mental health advocate and clinical researcher. As a former NICU parent, she is passionate about improving outcomes for NICU parents. She earned her master's in community agency counseling at George Mason University and is currently a PhD student in clinical psychology at George Washington University. Anese, welcome so much. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's just start with your story. Because I'm really curious to know if you got into clinical psychology before or after your NICU experience. But tell us your story.
Yes, thank you for the space. So I'll try to wrap it up in a nice little bow so we don't take all the time. Because I know our stories are so precious to us. And of course, as you alluded to, it is a big part of why I even do this professional work. So I was a therapist working with children and mothers for so many years. And then I became a mom to my first baby born in 2019, and I had a very high risk pregnancy, lots very tumultuous and scary. And I experienced PPROM at 31 weeks. He was IUGR, and then somehow I lasted in the hospital for 2 weeks.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was really strange because I was already 5 centimeters dilated.
Oh my gosh.
I had a cerclage. It broke, it tore through my uterus,
Oh
and
my gosh.
somehow I miraculously stayed pregnant for 2 more weeks.
Wow. That is a miracle. Oh my goodness. That is not usually what you hear. That is amazing. And how many weeks were you, did you say, when that happened?
31 weeks at that point. So then
Mhm.
he was born at 33 weeks, and
Wow.
being IUGR, being smaller, so he was about the size of a 29 weeker. And so we had about a 7 week stay in our NICU. And, we all know how scary and stressful the experience is. And
Mhm.
so I went through my own time of healing. And when I came out of that, I just became very passionate about helping mommies like myself. And I began to get trained in how to work professionally as a counselor with this population.
Mhm.
And then I started to feel like, I'm working with these moms after the fact, but
Right.
what if we could help them a little bit closer, like while they're in the NICU or
Mhm.
more, um, when they have a more recent discharge instead of waiting so
Mhm.
long. And so that's when
Right.
I decided to go back to school for clinical psychology, and all my work is around perinatal mental health and particularly around prevention. So wanting to
Mhm.
not only treat conditions like PTSD, but really thinking about how do we prevent PTSD,
Mm.
other mental health conditions.
Well, I'm excited to get deeper into the conversation and hear about what you've learned, because I don't know that people often think about the fact that maybe they can be prevented, or you know usually we're just supporting, like you said, supporting after the fact. So getting in there at the front end before it happens, um, would be really valuable. So tell me, you mentioned your own healing during your NICU experience or after. Can you tell me a little bit, if it's not too personal, um, about what that meant for you and what that looked like for you?
Yes. So I always say, I think around the time that my son was 1 year, almost 1 years old, I went to a baby shower. And there was someone next to me, they just had a baby, and he said, "Oh yeah, my wife had the baby early." So I thought, "Oh, there's a NICU sister here." So
Yeah.
I'm all ears, we started talking, and the baby was full term. There were no issues, no challenges, no NICU experience.
Mm.
And my response was, "Oh, that's not early, that's full." And so it was in that moment I realized, I very insightful, reflective, and I said, my emotional response here is
Mm.
probably bigger than it should. Like, what's happening inside of me doesn't
Mhm.
match the situation. And that's when I knew I need to look for a therapist myself.
Mm. Mhm.
And as I started to search, I found out about these therapists who specialized in perinatal and maternal health. And
Mhm.
so that's when I began doing my own therapy, working through my experience, and it was great. But that therapist didn't have a lot of experience with the NICU, both professionally or personally. And so
Mhm.
there was just a little something missing. And then I found Project NICU. Uh,
Mm.
and that's when I was able to start joining support groups. And
Mhm.
it was that connection, that what we call that universality of finding other people who was speaking the same language as me, had the same experiences as me, feelings, um, that really catapulted that healing that I was already working on. That's what I needed to go, oh, it's not just me. There's not just me. And I just continued to work through that. And of course, I did some journaling, and I was very open with my partner about
Mhm.
how I was feeling, and open with my mom, who's a good support to me, about how I was feeling. And so a mix of social support. And I went out for that support,
Mhm.
of course, like, my dream is to be able to catch families that
Mhm.
don't necessarily come with all the knowledge about therapy and
Right.
self-help that I do. But given my background, I sought all that help
Mhm.
that I really needed to push me forward.
Yeah, that's a really, really key point, and something too that you said that I think is um, not common, is that you really had that because of your own training. You had that self-awareness to say, "Oh, my reaction does not match the situation." And I think a lot of people, I know I didn't have that that self-awareness early on, the way you did. It's come later in life with lots of therapy. um, but yeah, a lot of people don't have that. So I think it's really important, and also the piece about peer support and what that means to be seen, to be heard, to see yourself in others. How powerful is that?
So powerful.
Yeah. And it's so what would you say to someone who might be kind of on the fence about not sure they want to go to a group, don't think they're really a group person? What would you say?
I understand the fears of putting yourself out there.
Mhm.
It feels really strange and uncomfortable. But the first time you go, because there are other people there, you can rely on the other people. You don't have to talk, but you can
Mhm.
just listen. And I really encourage that because I think for the first time, you will hear somebody speak what you think and feel, and you won't have to say it. And you will
Right.
feel understood without having to teach someone how to understand what you've been
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that's a beautiful way to put it. There is something very special about knowing that you're not alone because this experience is so isolating. And it's, it's not common that you'll have a whole circle of friends who have had this same experience. You find those friends later as
through. Yes.
you as you begin to join groups and organizations and so forth. But when you're in the thick of it, like I said, being seen and feeling heard is just so validating and comforting. And, I remember with my own experience just thinking, I think I'm crazy. Like, and I don't use that word, in a derogatory way. Like, I really did think that something was really wrong with me because I felt so different from those around me. And it really was, being a part of a group. Now, my experience was 17 years ago, so we didn't have quite what we've got these days.
Yeah.
It was, I think they were Yahoo Messenger groups or something. But it was, just seeing somebody write out what they were feeling, what they were experiencing was just, even just in the written form, it was very powerful.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about post traumatic stress disorder. Um, before I began my own trauma therapy, I did not equate PTSD with anything other than veterans, people who had, survived a horrific accident, natural disaster, sexual assault, something that felt very violent and just terrifying. I did not equate that to having a NICU baby, losing a child. And it wasn't until I read a book called Before the World Intruded,
Mm.
just by Michelle Rosenthal. Um, and it was a memoir written about her experience as a teenager. She had a medical trauma. And it wasn't until years later that she realized she had PTSD. And it was finally like reading this book, I thought, that's what this is. Like it wasn't just anxiety. It wasn't just depression. It wasn't just grief. Like it was something else. And so talk to us about that. What is PTSD?
Yeah. It's so interesting that still so many people equate post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, with combat
Mm-hmm.
veterans and have a hard time, even among academics, have a hard time sometimes recognizing that this can happen to birthing people and particularly in the NICU. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so if I was to define PTSD for you, what it is, it's it's one of the many mental health conditions, but the difference is that it is triggered by a terrifying event, something scary,
Mm-hmm.
something um that I would almost say maybe you lose autonomy, right? And so when you reference the word violence, in many ways, sometimes what happens to us in birth and postpartum can feel like some sort of like emotional violence, right? Like it's not
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
physical,
Sure.
but we have this sort of doubts about our body, and we become, sometimes we have thoughts and emotions around our bodies and ourselves that are violent or self-deprecating. Um,
Mhm.
and so ultimately that big thing is, it's about this triggering event. And it's also about witnessing that event or even
Mm.
about hearing about it. And I
Mhm.
think that's important too, because as our field grows and we continue to elevate the birthing parent, mothers, we are recognizing how important fathers and non-birthing parents are to this equation.
Mhm.
And even though they are not the ones necessarily physically having these experiences, they are witnessing this as well. Um, and so these symptoms of PTSD can include flashbacks, nightmares, and like you said, anxiety, but not just anxiety, like a very severe
Mhm.
debilitating sense of anxiety and even uncontrollable thoughts about what happened to you.
Mhm.
Even a
Yeah.
sense of feeling numb. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it's something I also think is pretty common, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that sense of hypervigilance,
Yes.
which, I really see a lot in, in other NICU families, bereaved parents as well during the NICU, after the NICU. And it almost, it can become debilitating when you're just always waiting for the other shoe to drop and figuring out what you can do to prevent that shoe from dropping. And so if that's a state that you feel like you are living in constantly, because isn't that the other thing about trauma, is that, we are wired for our brains to respond, fight, flight, freeze, but not for a prolonged period of time.
Exactly.
And that's the big difference. And the other thing I think that's, you said witnessing trauma, it's not just you and your baby, but there's other families in the NICU that you're going to be exposed to, no matter, even if there's private rooms, So how, um, can you talk a little bit about that? Because people might not really be aware that, okay, they're not looking at that baby across the hall that, having a rough time, but it's happening.
Yeah. So I'll even share a little bit about my
Hmm.
experience in the NICU.
Please.
So we were, a grower and feeder, as they call them, the little, the little healthy preemies who are trying to grow. We had a few hiccups, but right, we were in an open bay NICU, and
Mm.
right across from us was a baby that passed away. One day I just
Mm.
came in, and I mean, that was frightening to think that in the place where my own baby was to be cared for, where I
Mhm.
was convincing myself that it is better for my baby to be here than with me, right?
Right,
And
right.
to see something so horrific happen to a
Mm.
baby and then watch a mother weep because of that,
Mm.
right? Weep
Right.
because of that. Um,
Mhm.
and so that certainly contributed to my own mental health as well.
Mhm.
And so absolutely, witnessing can contribute greatly to the development of PTSD, this hypervigilance that you reference, and these prolonged experiences, right? So almost
Mhm.
like a chronic sense of stress. And those are the things that create PTSD, right?
Mhm.
Because anxiety and stress is something that we all experience. Our
Mhm.
minds and our bodies are equipped to navigate those. But when we are experiencing those chronically prolonged sense of
Mhm.
periods of time, it becomes really difficult for our bodies to regulate and also to recognize that we're not always in that sense of danger. Um,
Mm.
and so, and lots of people, when they talk about trauma, they talk back to, sort of those old ancient days, right? Prehistoric days
Mhm.
where these systems in our body were designed to really protect us
Mhm.
from the big bad world,
Right.
animals, all sorts of things. And it was great. Like, oh, it was great. But flight or fight was great because we knew get out and get safe, or I'm going to protect my family. However,
Mhm.
as we translate that into what's going on now, it doesn't really serve us because it
Mhm.
creates in us heightened. It's not only about the psychological aspects, but also what happens to us physically, right? What
Mm.
happens to our the different systems, our organs, when we are in those heightened stress states for so long. And that's why we can also, in PTSD, experience a sense of detachment from one's body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Having difficulty recognizing when you're even hungry, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that really disrupts the ability to take care of yourself as a new mother or parent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Really having these all of these difficulties are connected to that.
I think that's a really important point too, that I think a lot of times we think, okay, mental health conditions reside here in the brain, but it really is, it does affect everything. And I mean, as soon as you said that sense of detachment, I mean, I remember very clearly feeling like I was just kind of like watching myself go through my days. And yeah, I mean, didn't know I was hungry ever. So, not healthy, not really paying attention to my own wellness physically. So it really is something that has to be considered hand in hand because, I mean, our brain is linked to everything. um, so I feel like we've kind of talked about why PTSD is so prevalent in the NICU population because, we have these repeated kind of traumas happening to us, to our baby, around us. Are there other contributing factors that make it prevalent to NICU families?
Yeah. So academically, we'll call them sights and sounds, right?
Okay.
Is one of the areas that when we're assessing stress in a NICU parent, we're actually also assessing that, like, how are you responding to what you're seeing? So yes, to your baby, seeing your baby hooked up, seeing your
Mm-hmm.
baby pricked for blood, seeing other babies, but also seeing medical equipment all around you, the
Mm-hmm.
lighting, hearing the constant beeping, and how you're responding to that and managing that while you're there will impact how you respond to those sort of sights and sounds when you leave, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing about PTSD, is that just because you experience a traumatic event, doesn't mean you will actually go on to experience to develop PTSD. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Many people will actually go on to experience some stress, they'll come down, but given the prolonged time that NICU parents are
Mm-hmm.
experiencing this, that's why we see those really elevated rates in this population. However, um, it is those sights and sounds that can go on to become big triggers later on. When you're
Mm-hmm.
out and you're in, sort of just doing your day-to-day life, you're watching TV, you hear beeps, you hear certain sounds, you see certain things. I remember for myself, the hand washing, right? How intense the
Mm-hmm.
hand washing was. And that
Mm-hmm.
whenever I would go somewhere and I would have to do, like, away from my own home, and I'd have to do a lot of hand washing, I would be transported back. Like, I would really
Mm-hmm.
see myself back in that place, in those scrubs, hand washing, and that would elicit those same stressful feelings for me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember a good friend, colleague saying, just going into McDonald's one day and it was like the beeps in the McDonald's were similar to the beeps in the NICU and she had to leave. Um, so now one of the things that we want to talk about is does PTSD present differently in different groups?
Okay. Can we take a quick pause for a second? You can ask.
Absolutely. Yep, sure.
Okay. Somebody
No
escaped
problem.
their babysitter
Yep,
and came in here.
no problem.
Yes, go have a nice pop, but I'm in a meeting, so don't, whichever one you want. Close the door behind you.
I'm waiting for my 4-year-old to like come, walking down the stairs any minute.
Okay. All right. I'm ready when you're ready.
Okay, no problem. All right, so I'll just restate the question. We'll start from there. So does PTSD present differently in different patient population?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would say the symptoms, of course, are static, the same, regardless of who you're working with, we would use the same criteria to diagnose someone. However, absolutely, it may present differently depending on the person, um, who they are, what they bring to the table. So in particular, marginalized communities or minority communities such as Black and Brown populations um, are more prone to actually describe or experience their symptoms somatically. So what that means is just really in the body, right?
Mm-hmm.
More so, you're looking for headaches and stomach aches. I once worked with a mother who was describing a trauma where she had to run.
Mm.
And whenever she was triggered, her feet would hurt or her ankles would hurt.
Really? Wow.
Yes, yes. And so, while we may see this across the board, right? Anyone
Mm-hmm.
can have somatic experiences. In communities of color, we would listen out a little bit more for
Mm-hmm.
those somatic symptoms like aches and pains and headaches, because they may be less likely to actually describe anxiety, to come in and say, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I'm really
Mm-hmm.
sad.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the differences can also be around how different communities seek help. So
Mm-hmm.
they may not recognize that they have PTSD, but people may recognize that something is not right.
Mm-hmm.
And where some, from the majority population may recognize there's something going on with my mental health. I need therapy. What we might hear from marginalized communities or communities of color may just be more around seeking help for the things going on in their lives. I'm
Mm-hmm.
irritable. I'm so angry and I'm fighting all the time with my partner. I need
Mm-hmm.
help for that. And the more you dig, you realize that, uh-oh, irritability, reactivity, hypervigilance. And you
Mm-hmm.
begin to start putting the pieces together and recognizing
Mm.
that there is something else going on.
That's
And
so
as we,
interesting.
yeah, I'm sorry, did you have
No,
a response?
I was just gonna say that's so interesting because I haven't heard that described before, and I think that's just fascinating that
Yeah.
that you do really have to think about how is this person describing what's going on with them.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's all often about shared language, like I mentioned when I went
Mm-hmm.
for the first time, right? So populations who might the majority population or sometimes more educated populations may have the same language that therapists have, right? You've been to therapy
Mm-hmm.
before, have you engaged in self-help, whereas other populations may not be privy to that, and so their
Mm-hmm.
descriptions or understandings of what is happening to them very, very much in how they describe what they need and why they need that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in particular, with communities of color, I also believe that it's really important to recognize that these communities are also coming in with layers of trauma, right? So we have
Mm.
that
Right.
NICU level trauma, but then we also have these symptoms of trauma related to um, structural or systemic challenges that are
Mm-hmm.
happening in the world and impacting their daily lives. And so while we treat those families for the NICU trauma, we also want to recognize some of these other pressures that may also impact how they experience the NICU too.
Right. Absolutely. And I would assume that um, previous traumatic experiences are going to make you more prone to developing PTSD if you have a NICU experience.
It is a
So
risk factor.
it's, yeah, so that's why, understanding a parent's history,
Yes.
not just medical history, but social history and, familial and society, all of those, like you said, those layers, it's multi-layered, it's complex, and you really do have to understand the whole picture to be
Yes,
able to really dig in and help that family.
absolutely.
So we've kind of talked about how PTSD, presents in people physically, emotionally, mentally. What is happening to the parent or caregiver relationship with the baby when you have a parent who is experiencing symptoms of PTSD?
Yeah, I think that it's what we expect, right? That there is going to be some level of disruption between that bonding that we expect. And when I work with parents, particularly mothers, what I always say is that your mental health is your baby's mental health, and they already
Mm,
have a mental health when they are born, when they come out.
mhm,
And how a mother feels, how she is supported, what she is experiencing, she's going to directly share that with her baby. So there's, of course, her mental health, her depression, anxiety, stressors. How is she being supported to manage those? Um,
mhm,
but then we might also consider PTSD and think about some of those symptoms, such as avoidance, right? And how avoidance can actually contribute to a parent backing away or avoiding
mhm,
engaging in parenting,
mhm,
engaging in coming to the NICU regularly to begin those small touches and making those early connections that we, as professionals, we know are so important to helping with bonding. Those cares, getting those opportunities to start learning how to do those things, that is also interrupted.
mhm,
Um, and so ultimately, even the anxiety, right? So all of these things, there's tons of research out there that have let us know that the more anxious the mom is, the more depressed, the more avoidant that she is, it doesn't fare well for the mental health and the development of a baby. And so the more that we hold a mother and care
mhm.
for her, we not only give her the best chance, but we give that baby the best chance too.
Absolutely. I love what you said that your mental health is your baby's mental health. And when we think about, you know, I know for myself, just the guilt of not being able to do enough for my baby, thinking about it that way, that that is something I can do for my baby. It's not selfish to focus on my own mental health, but it actually is something that's going to help my baby too. So,
Yeah.
one of the things that the National Perinatal Association has advocated for a long time is screening of parents in the NICU. Um, so why do you think this doesn't happen just across the board all the time?
Yeah, so I think I'll start with just the constraints of the medical physicians,
Hmm.
um, who already have a lot of demands on them. And if a hospital doesn't already have a system of who is going to screen, it becomes a concern around, do medical physicians, whether even nurses, have the time in their very busy um, days providing care, medical care, are they able to actually screen? The
Hmm.
second thing that I've heard a lot is uncertainty around how to respond when there is a positive screening. And I
Hmm.
think that's one of the bigger barriers, because even when we
Hmm.
manage the time and we say, okay, here's how you can screen, we're gonna, at the doctor's office, you're gonna get a quick screener when you come in. The challenge becomes, how do I respond if there's a positive screener? And then families feel very let down too when they
Hmm.
complete the screeners and then nothing happens next.
Right.
Yeah. And then of course, the NICU has their uniqueness about it is that it is a medical place designed to care for a baby's physical health.
Hmm. Right.
It is not like the labor and delivery floor that begins focusing on a mom and then becomes about mother and baby.
Right.
And we are moving to a place as a profession where we are recognizing that physically healthy babies, um, also need mentally well parents.
Hmm.
However, we are lagging behind in how we are implementing that. And I think some of that starts with, how are we not just simply training about screening, but how are we training the staff to respond when
Right.
they are giving out screeners? How do we build their confidence so that they're
Hmm.
comfortable responding and taking care of families when there is positive screeners?
Hmm. Yeah, because not every NICU has an embedded NICU psychologist. I
No.
hope in my lifetime that will become the norm, just like there's a neonatologist, there's a NICU psychologist, because it's just so critical for for that profession to be able to be there for the families and for the staff. Um,
Yes.
I know we're really focusing on PTSD in the family, but I mean, that's a whole nother episode, I think, is understanding the effects on staff as well. Um, so definitely a barrier there. And that, I think that, that's something that we've heard just related to any mental health disorder is that, okay, I can screen, but I don't have the resources to connect this family. to help. And so then they just don't screen. So I'm hopeful that that will also continue to change, particularly as we have so many community-based organizations um, that can provide that kind of support, or connections to resources to provide that kind of support. Um, so let me ask you about kind of healing. And you talked a little bit about this from in the beginning. And I remember actually going to a therapist who just told me, you never recover from this. You just have to learn how to cope with it. And I left there feeling so defeated. I just thought, oh my gosh, I am going to have to live like this forever? Really? And then I read that book, Before the World Intruded, and it's her personal journey of discovering, that she had PTSD and her healing and recovery. Um, and I'm, thankful to say that I feel that I have healed and recovered from my PTSD diagnosis. I can't say that I'm never triggered, but it certainly is not, I don't feel like I'm just coping through my life. So what do you say to that about healing and recovery from PTSD?
I have never heard that before. I've never heard that. I can't believe someone told you that. That is the opposite of encouraging, right? It's
Right? I didn't go back to that therapist, so
no wonder, and I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad, I'm glad. Wow. And I mean, that right there is a message too, right? That
right.
um mental health providers are imperfect, just like any other sort of medical provider, and that sometimes you have to walk away and look for someone else who
Mm-hmm.
it feels more knowledgeable, can better understand you, and has better skills to support what you're experiencing. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that right there is an amazing share. But um, I agree. I think that a person will certainly, you will carry your story with you forever,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can go with help. You are going to be well again in life. Um, I will give an analogy that many, many, many years ago, I was working with a little girl who had been through trauma in her own life. And as we got to the end of our work together, what she said to me was, Miss Anese, it's almost like when I fall down from riding my bike and I get a big boo-boo and I'm bleeding, it's hurting, it's really, really bad. And then you're like the help. You come and you put peroxide, you give me a band-aid and you check on it all the time. And then over time, it starts to heal and get better. But I do keep the scar because I'll never forget what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't bother me anymore. The
Right.
scar becomes smaller, so I don't think about it as much, and I'm able to enjoy my life. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that I think that the same thing is true for NICU parents, that you will carry this story with you for the rest of your life. You will think of it. Sometimes it will make you sad, and other times you will feel joyful thinking about how far you have come in your story. And it's okay to have both, that you can have some
Mm-hmm.
sadness and you can have some joy with the
Mm-hmm.
story. But with support, whether you go to individual therapy or you seek peer support from a group, if you do self-help, reading an amazing book like you did, reaching out and connecting with the people in your life, that you will be able to enjoy life again. You can, with help, mindfulness, um, relaxation, getting reconnected to your body, that these sorts of tools and strategies will help you to be able to enjoy your life again, feel
Mm-hmm.
connected to yourself and your body again. You can,
Mm-hmm.
like you will get to, you deserve and you can enjoy your life going forward.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. Let me ask you something, and this was not on my list of questions, but it was something I was talking with another peer leader just the other day. We've both been kind of in this peer support, NICU family advocate role for well over 10 years now. Um, and one of the things that we both had to learn how to do was to separate ourselves from our story. And what I mean by that is we had to stop defining ourselves by our story because, in the beginning, we both, and this is how we connected in the first place, really, was that we were just both trying to fill this hole. And we just dove head first into advocacy and support. And, but it was almost like whereas previously I said, okay, I'm not worthy because I couldn't stay pregnant. I couldn't protect my children, right? Then it moved to, I'm not worthy unless,
Mm.
XYZ happens. I'm able to accomplish ABC in this work. I'm able to help this number of families. So just in your personal and professional role, how important, because our stories are important and they shape us and they change us and they will shape and change other people. But you do have to, in my opinion, my non-clinical opinion, just from my experiential opinion, be able to separate yourself so that you're not defining your worth
Mm-hmm.
in your story. Am I making any sense?
Lots of sense. And it's almost kind of like two separate things. I think it's like
Yeah.
absolutely when you're doing this work serving other people, you have to recognize that this is for them. And part
Mhm.
of how to do that is making sure you have something for you,
Yeah.
making sure that if there's a different group that you go to get your needs met, if you have a therapist, because that is your place. It's almost like,
Mhm.
compartmentalizing in a way, but ensuring that while you do that, you're working through your healing. When I go to
Mhm.
my therapist, when I go to my support group, I tell my story, I share, I heal. When I go to facilitate this group, I am there to hear
Right.
others, to
Mhm.
carry and hold others.
Mhm.
And so that's as long as we are ensuring that we are doing something for us separate,
Mhm.
that will help us to
Yeah.
separate that. But you speaking a lot to something else too around that worth piece, kind
Mhm.
of. And we didn't talk about this, but a
Mm-mm. Let's talk about it now.
One way that trauma can actually show up is overdoing things, right? Kind of
Mm.
diving head in,
Mhm.
overworking, and it can be a sign of avoidance in some
Mhm.
ways.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yep.
And in many ways, also trying to fill those areas like you're talking about worth, right?
Mhm.
Worth doesn't have to be connected to a mental health condition, but we often see
Right.
it connected to depression as well. But trauma too. And trauma, when we're diagnosed and we even often ask, do you feel after this trauma that you are no longer, do you not feel worthy? Do you feel guilty?
Mhm.
All right.
Mhm. Mhm.
And these can sometimes they look like healthy ways to work
Mhm.
through things.
Right.
And that's what it's almost like it's a high functioning person, right? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yep.
to the people around you, you're probably, no one's really thinking that there's something wrong. They really need help because it looks like,
Right.
oh my God, they're so strong. Look at them
Right.
do for
Right.
everyone
Look at all that they've been through and now look at all that they're doing.
else.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Um, yep. So that's something to think about and to remember. And I think, again, when we can kind of create a space for ourselves, we allow ourselves to begin to work on that worth piece
Mhm.
so that our work really becomes about serving, because that's what it is, right? It's being a
Right.
servant to other
Mhm.
people.
Right.
And just like motherhood, parenthood,
Mm.
is that
Mhm.
there is this aspect of serving someone else, serving other people, but we cannot deplete ourselves in serving, right? As
Yes.
parents, as leaders, we have
Mhm.
to ensure that we have something else where we
Mhm.
are expressing, we are healing, we are
Yeah.
refilling ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They talking about kind of working so much as a way to avoid, I had never considered that until really just, a few months ago. I was in
Right.
actually a session with my daughter, one of my daughters who's going through some things right now. And that was what the therapist said, because my daughter had a hospitalization a few months ago that was traumatic and triggering for me, and so we were kind of having a family session about it, and I was saying something about advocacy work, and she said, now Kiera, that's great to do, but what are you avoiding by doing that? Have you processed what you experienced, or have you just been focusing on your child and what they experienced? And I had, I'm just to have her say that and then you say that, it makes complete sense that you feel like you're not avoiding it because you're working in the space, right? You're a part of the work to heal and help other people, but you are avoiding processing your own experience. And that is so important what you said about, just making sure that we as leaders are taking care of ourselves. I mean, it's going to make us better leaders, better parents, better friends, better partners. Um, and it also, we've got a model for those that are coming after us, right?
Yes, abs 100%. The leaders coming after us, our children who are watching us.
Mhm.
It's so important for them to see, people do as you do, not as you say, you
Right.
know, you know.
Exactly. Yep, absolutely. So you've mentioned, Project NICU, and I believe you're a board member, is that
Yes,
right? So
yes.
that's wonderful. So you actually went to Project NICU, got support, and now are a part of the leadership, which is amazing. So you're very well versed in what these community-based organizations can do to help families. So what do you, I think we talked about, if we can just kind of encapsulate some of those things, we talked about peer support. What else, if you're talking to someone who's running an organization, what, what else might there be that they want to think about?
Yeah. Um, so I think in some of the work that I'm doing now, even outside of the NICU community, but working with parents in my local area doing research, I find that it's that about that warm handoff. So making sure that
Mm,
parents have this warm handoff to the resources and connections that we
mhm.
want to provide.
Right.
So I think these organization leaders are doing a fantastic job. Honestly, they're doing better than I think the hospitals are doing, better than probably some of the psychology offices. I think that those on the ground are just doing the most amazing, heart-filled work. And I think that some of the ways that these maybe organization leaders can enhance what they're doing is some of training and equipping with some of the basic listening skills that can enhance the delivery of maybe that empathetic interaction when we're trying to connect
Mhm,
parents to resources. So I
mhm.
think it's like amazing for everybody to have those kind of basic skills that counselors already come with, right? That clinicians
Right, right.
with. And that really helps you to be able to validate in the moment, listen, but then be able to listen and then move to the help part in a way that's
Mhm.
empathetic. Um,
Right.
and then we talked about screening. And so I don't think it's like an organization's job to screen, but
Mhm,
certainly to be able to recognize with some of these conditions. So having some basic knowledge. And so maybe one thing I would leave around PTSD is what I call the CARE acronym.
mhm,
And this could be used to kind of help if you are interfacing with parents. How do I
mhm,
know if this is just a worry or should
mhm,
I be concerned and seek
mhm,
support?
mhm,
And so the CARE acronym is for C, so constant recall. So that's what we talked a little bit around those flashbacks. So like I said,
mhm,
kind of washing my hands and then feeling like I
mhm.
was right back in that NICU again, being
Right.
somewhere. And you can notice that because you'll see that people will look like they will dissociate.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
sometimes dissociation just looks like someone's sort of checked out. They suddenly become quiet in the conversation where they were once lively and communicating. They may look off and away. intrusive thoughts about their NICU experience that they just can't control no matter what.
Mhm,
The
mhm,
A is for avoidance, which we've talked a lot about today. So
mhm,
deliberately avoiding places, people, or thought. So that work that we talked about, that's a
mhm,
lot around avoiding those thoughts that remind you
mhm.
of the NICU, but
Right.
also avoiding the people and the places. And while it might be obvious to think about how we want to avoid the hospital where our babies were, we might not even consider that people may be going out of their way to avoid the routes that they took
Mm,
to the NICU. So small
mhm,
things like that. The R
mhm,
is for reactivity. So that hypervigilance that you mentioned. And recognizing that reactivity also goes beyond hypervigilance, that it can be irritability. When we see someone
mhm.
who just is so much more irritable, frustrated, angry than
Mhm.
before the experience,
Right.
um, as well as an exaggerated startle response. So it seems like every little thing sets this person off,
Mm,
that's a
mhm.
sign. And
Yeah.
then E is for emotional numbness. And we talked about this too. So that feeling
Mhm,
detached, not just from
mhm.
yourself, but from
Right.
others that you usually feel connected to, a loss
Mhm,
of interest in activities and things that you used to, um,
mhm,
just a constant sense of negative emotions.
mhm,
So being able to kind of just have a basic understanding of that, I think will help those who are doing this work at the ground level recognize when someone needs to go a little bit beyond peer support, because peer support is
Sure.
incredible. But when
Mhm.
we have families who are suffering from more significant mental health conditions like
Right.
major depression, anxiety, and especially like PTSD, we want to
Mhm.
ensure that the eyes, that you're able
Right.
to recognize that, so you can maybe pull those families to the side and say, you don't have to tell them that you suspect PTSD, but being able to just use sort of those basic
Mhm.
skills of, I recognize that seems like
Mhm.
things are a little harder for you. Is
Right.
that true? And
Yeah.
I'm thinking that when things are harder, and the support group is great, but it's not may not always be enough.
Mhm.
And
Sure.
having those resources like of therapists that are vetted, right? Therapists that we know
Mhm.
have worked with NICU parents.
Yeah.
We've heard some reviews about them. We know what their work is like, and being able to
Mhm.
provide some level of warm handoff
Mhm.
between that parent that we are suspecting something's going on with
Mhm.
and a clinician.
Yeah. And that's one thing too that you've said twice now is just that importance of the specialization. Just like you were talking about, going to a therapist is great, but going to a therapist who has experience with trauma, who has experience with NICU, is it is even better if you can find it. And I certainly found that in my own therapy journey. Went through several that were just not what uh not what I needed. And then when you do find that uh, connection to that therapist or psychiatrist that understands that full breadth, it's really very helpful. I didn't even know that maternal mental health specialists were a thing until you know I needed one. So if you don't know they exist, they do. And
Right, same.
Anese is one of them. I just want to ask you to fill in the blank. NICU and bereaved families are,
Brave.
yes, I love that. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Anese, for this wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it, and I know all of our listeners will as well. And I just want to encourage everyone out there who is listening to please make sure that you mark your calendars for our monthly offerings. We're always publishing these on our Facebook page, Instagram, LinkedIn, and on our website. So thank you all so much, and thank you, Anese.
Thank you for having me.